Hello and welcome. Star Trek's Pavel Chekhov started as a lowly ensign, but finished his epic space career as an admiral in the futuristic world created by Gene Roddenberry. In the fantastical universe on the Starship Enterprise, it was a near warp-speed journey for US actor Walter Koenig that included 3 years of the original TV series, 7 feature films, and countless voicings of his character Ensign Checkov in animated films and video games. But while Walter will forever be associated with the Star Trek phenomenon, he had already begun to carve out a Hollywood acting career back in the 1960s, appearing in episodes of Gidget, Ben Casey, Mr. Novak, Mannix and The Untouchables. Then, after the Star Trek stories in film and TV moved on to the new generation of characters and actors, Walter expanded his career options with many other roles in film and TV, including writing scripts, directing TV and theatrical productions, and also doing some drama coaching. Now, while Walter is of Russian heritage, his character was Russian and he spoke with a Russian accent, Walter was actually born in Chicago in 1936. The accent was pure acting. Now, I caught up with him back in 1986, just after he'd finished shooting Star Trek The Voyage Home, or Star Trek IV, as it's referred to, when he came to Australia for a time warp convention.
I'll bet you never dreamed 20 years ago, and then some, that today you'd still be travelling the world talking about Star Trek.
Well, you hit it right on the head. There's no question about it. When we were told in 1969 that we had been canceled as a television series, and Gene Roddenberry, the creator of the show, called us and said, I hope we'll get a chance to work again sometime. We took it, as a parting salutation, a nice way of saying goodbye, never believing there was anything prophetic in those words. And sure enough, 10 years later, we did our first Star Trek feature film, and now another 8 years after that, we are still making Star Trek.
Why? I mean, the obvious answer perhaps would be the legion of Trekkies around the world, but there must be more to it than that.
Well, I think the reason lies in why the legion of Trekkies, and I think it can be answered on several levels. I think perhaps the most obvious one is that we have projected a future in our show that is a very positive one, a kind of world state in which people of different ethnicities and different cultural backgrounds can work and live and love together without losing their identity. The future is often depicted in science fiction as being either kind of a homogeneous, anonymous society where everybody has a number, or one where there is destruction, annihilation, and a very barren kind of society. We are saying that with a little luck and a sense of humanity, brotherhood, etc., we might still achieve the promised land in terms of a better world. And I think that's a very positive statement, and one that bears repeating, and I think is very reassuring at a time when Australian Parliament is debating whether or not we should permit naval bases, nuclear bases here in Australia as well as around the world, where there's a threat of arms buildup, where the Russians and the Americans are screaming at each other. I think Star Trek is an oasis.
So you also see it as obviously a crusading voice.
I do believe. A crusading voice without the disadvantage of, or without the hindrance of a soapbox. Our stories have always woven in a very, I think, subtle way, topical statements of a socio-political nature, woven those into our stories without making you feel like you're being lectured or talked down to.
Is there a conscious air and even discussion about those sort of attitudes during the making of the films?
Well, I think for this picture there certainly was. I think that Star Trek 2 and 3 were more action-adventure films. I don't mean to, attribute a profundity that wasn't there. They were made really with the idea of simple entertainment involved as the reward, and I think they achieved that. I think Star Trek 4 does make a very poignant salient statement about the human condition and about the consequences of greed and lack of humanity. And I think we couldn't help escape, that sense in the movie, and so of course we discussed it while the picture was being made.
Mm. Who was the creative force, if you like, behind that theme?
I'm not entirely sure. I don't know what transpires behind closed doors. I've become aware of what's happening at the time we step onto the soundstage. The pre-production work is done in solitude and in some secret. I do know that Leonard Nimoy had a concept that was woven into the story. That Harve Bennett, who was our producer, and oh gosh, all of a sudden I forgot his name. The fellow who directed Star Trek II, Nick Meyer, wrote the screenplay based on an outline, a story outline by two other young writers. But I don't know what their contribution was, because I never saw that treatment, I never saw that outline. But I think it's a compilation of thoughts contributed by several individuals.
Mm-hmm. The theme, is that reflected, do you find, in your meetings with Trekkies around the world? Or are they just caught up in the mythology that's been created by the television series?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Well, you're talking about this attitude that there's going to come through in the new film,
mm-hmm.
and your feeling for it, and the feeling of the other people making the film. But I just wonder if you've discovered that that is sort of also an attitude that's reflected by Trekkies, by the long, as I said, the legion of fans.
I think that's an awfully good question, and one I really haven't been asked in those terms before. I think that's true. I think there is first of all, there's always a fringe element in any kind of a movement, and their attitude might be somewhat aberrant, in terms of their motivation for involvement, whether it be in Australian rules football or Star Trek or what have you, cricket. But beyond that extreme group, I think Star Trek fans do bring a sense of fraternity and a sense of hope for a better world. I think they do relish that kind of concept and look for it in our film. I think, generally speaking, they're an awfully good group. I think they've been depicted sometimes in the media as being strange because they sometimes dress up in costumes, etc. But I find them to be stimulating people, intelligent people, and people who would hope were looking for a better society.
Mm. Tell me, at the end of the television series, when you presumably, obviously turned your professional eye to a whole range of other things, did you ever actually think that the series could have been made into a feature film then? And what did you begin to do with yourself after the series ended?
I don't think I really gave it much thought about what Star Trek could have done beyond what we did. I'm a bit of a fatalist, I suppose. I assumed that when we were canceled, and I really stopped thinking about Star Trek. It was only, when the conventions began and we started getting invitations all over the country and indeed in Europe as well, to attend this kind of festivity, that I began to think that we might have a life after death. But that took a considerable amount of time coming. It was over the course of the 10 years between the series ending and the feature film's beginning.
Mm.
What I did personally, first of all, the phone did not ring at all after the series was canceled. I had worked fairly consistently and in guest starring roles on television before Star Trek, but I found that I was suddenly existing in a desert when the show was canceled. And to maintain some sense of emotional equilibrium, I chose to do that which I could do without depending on anybody else, and that was to write.
Mm.
So I sat down and I wrote a novel. I got up at 6:30 every morning, and sat for 5 or 6 hours a day writing on a novel during that whole first year after the show was canceled. It didn't sell, but it received sufficient critical reinforcement that I felt that perhaps I was tapping some modicum of talent, and that I might pursue writing as a career. The first screenplay I wrote thereafter was optioned by NBC and then re-optioned over the course of a year to be made into a movie of the week. It never happened, but again, there was a sizable compensation for the optioning, and I found myself an agent as a consequence and began to write in earnest. I subsequently sold 6 or 7 television scripts, which were produced, made into television episodes for different series, and really only abandoned it when I felt that I could no longer see in the finished product what the input that I had made. It had been so changed in the course of rewriting that I was not feeling any sense of gratification, any sense of reward. I had been writing feature screenplays on speculation since then, and I believe, and I underscore that, that I'm close to a sale now on a feature film with a major studio.
Oh, great.
Well, it's close. You know, one is always waiting for the other shoe to drop, and I'm not 100% convinced it's going to materialize, but the response to date has been overwhelmingly positive, so I look forward to that.
Great. And so obviously you've continued to write between the movies consistently. Right.
In fact, I wrote during the shooting of Star Trek 4. You know, when you make a movie, it's a lot of hurry up and wait.
Yes, that's right.
In my hand, so I was writing even while we were shooting.
Right. Very wise man. What about other acting roles in recent years?
Not in great amounts. Television, which is the most obvious form of employment, has not been very rewarding for me. I have not found the opportunities that I would have hoped. I think some of it has to do with being stereotyped as the Russian on Star Trek. Some of it has to do with the nature of the business, where the supply so far exceeds the demand, and where they're always looking for new and young faces, where they cater to a very young audience.
Yeah, sure.
I think that because of those factors, I have not found employment very ready. On the other hand, I have been touring in a one-act play with another actor who has appeared in Star Trek. His name is Mark Leonard, and played Spock's father, and has achieved a considerable following on his own as a consequence of that role. And we've been touring in a play called Actors, a one-act play, and we've done about 25 dates throughout the States doing that play. And now we're looking at a new play, if we can get the rights to, it's a longer, full production that we hope to be able to work into our itinerary next year.
Right. Tell me, you just mentioned, it reminded me of what we were talking about earlier, saying Checkov the Russian. Did you ever get any anti-feedback at all because you were a Russian?
You know, that's interesting. Honest to God, I can't remember once getting a letter that was hostile. I think though even though the 60s was a turbulent time, it did not generate the kind of anti-Soviet feeling that we have now. At that time, I think you could still write a Russian and make him sympathetic. Now, with the advent of the Rocky movies and the ilk, I think it'd be much more unlikely that you would find a Russian that you could rally to, that you could find sympathetic.
Yes, Reaganism has certainly done a terrible disservice to the world at large, I'm afraid.
I concur totally on that basis. On that, certainly there is reason to feel threatened and to feel suspicious of Soviet intent in several areas, but I don't think we provide a climate where we can improve relations by depicting Russians as being evil creatures whose only intention is to is to destroy or control the world.
Yes, if you had a choice between the Martians, the Venusians, the Vulcans, and and the Russians, we'd be going for the aliens, obviously, on a good day. Now, the trip out here, that was for a couple of things, I presume.
Well, it was initially, I was invited to attend this Star Trek convention that's being held here at the Hyde Park Plaza next door. I think it's called the Anzac House. The purpose of that is to bring together people who have an affection for Star Trek and for science fiction, give them an opportunity to share their feelings and beliefs with others who are like-minded, and to learn from the guest, who happens to be me in this case, what's happening with Star Trek and where it's heading. I will be doing a talk. I'll be doing a little skit that I have created. There will be films all day long over the weekend. Science fiction as well, Star Trek films. There will be a dealer's room where they'll be selling science fiction memorabilia, and there will be a costume parade where people can dress up in whatever costume that they have fashioned for themselves.
What's it called again? It's the title of the whole thing.
I was afraid you were going to ask me that. Just if you hold on 1 second, I'll tell you.
It's something the Time Warp.
It's called Time Warp, right? Yeah, it's called Time Warp Convention.
The Time Warp Convention, right.
And the other reason I'm here is to vacation. I've never been in this part of the world. We spent 3 days in Melbourne, we being my wife and daughter and I, and we're going to spend another 7 or 8 here in environs in Sydney, and we're having a grand time.
Oh, that's great. It sounds like you also got to the grand final, or you were at least in Melbourne during the grand final.
I was there during the grand final. It reminded me of the Saturday college football game with all the excitement going on.
Yes. It's a rare occurrence down there. I mean, in world terms. Actually, it's seen on, it goes out on ESPN cable right across America.
Yeah, I've never seen, I was watching it on TV, and it's really quite extraordinary. I've never seen a game where you can punch, dribble, kick the ball, do anything you want with it, and everything is done to it.
Non-stop.
Non-stop, absolutely non-stop, and without padding.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, I must admit, on behalf of, football fans around Australia, we do sort of smile a little when we see the American footballers come out with crash helmets and padding and God knows what else.
Right.
Anyway, that's something else. And now, just a little bit more about the latest Star Trek film. Do you think, and I haven't seen the film yet, but from what I've read, do you think it works going back in to the future, back to the past at least?
I think it works enormously well. I believe this is going to be the most successful Star Trek film. I think, let me tell you that they had a sneak preview in Tucson, Arizona, which is a sort of a middle-class, semi-retirement community, which would be conservative if you were to give it, if you would generalize it all, and received in that sneak preview from an audience, a hand-picked audience, a cross-section audience, received the highest rating a Paramount Pictures ever received. Higher than Beverly Hills Cop, higher than anything they've ever done before. The anticipation is for a crossover box office smash film that will appeal not only to the genre audience, but to the general population. A picture that could stand on its own without the Star Trek logo.
And that
I really sound like I'm a Paramount representative, don't I?
You do a bit, yeah.
And I'm,
you've obviously got points in the film, though.
Well, no, I don't. And I was going to say, you can only trust what you hear, and I can only tell you that I am not here as they did not pay my way. They did not offer me any compensation for doing these interviews. It is really based on my own enthusiasm,
right?
Some of which is self-interest, because this film gives me an opportunity as the character of Checkov to flourish a little, to spread the theatrical wings a little bit.
Oh, really?
Still a supporting role, and I don't mean to make more of it than it is, but the role, the way that the supporting characters have been written this time, they're far more dimensionalized. The dialogue is indigenous to the character. It is not, the kind of dialogue that anybody can say. There is, in fact, references to the fact that I'm Russian. They haven't done that since the television series days. So I'm very pleased that I feel like I'm making a palpable contribution in this picture, whereas
Right.
I've not always felt that way in the past.
Right, yeah. Well, look, thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoy your stay out here a great deal, and maybe we'll get to meet in person one day.
I hope so.
Alrighty.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Walter. Bye.
In 2023, Walter turns 87. His most recent appearance as Admiral Checkov was in the pilot of Star Trek Renegades back in 2015. It never got a release, but in 2017 evolved into Renegades, a two-part fan-funded miniseries that also featured fellow original series star Nichelle Nichols. Legal issues precluded the producers from using original character names, so only their rankings were used.